In this movie, I'd like to show you the workflow for fixing a common case that may seem to trip up Warp Stabilizer, but where you can still use it. Now, those who have worked their way through our After Effects Apprentice book might recognize this shot from our Track and Key chapter. I'll RAM preview, and you'll see we've got a green screen stage, tracking dots on the back wall, handheld camera. Believe it or not, this shot will drive Warp Stabilizer crazy. Warp Stabilizer makes some certain assumptions that the objects in the foreground, more or less in the middle of the screen, are ones you want to keep stable, and it's the background that can go ahead and move to keep the foreground stable and in the camera's framing. However, this shot is exactly the opposite. The background with the tracking dots is what we want to stabilize. The foreground should be allowed to move whatever it needs to follow the camera's movement. And just to show you how it gets crossed up, I'll go ahead and apply Warp Stabilizer to this shot. It starts analyzing it in the background. By the way, the reason this banner looks stretched is that this was HDV format footage, which is anamorphic, 1440 pixels, need to get stretched out to 1920. This comp is actually 1920 by 1080. That's why you're seeing some stretching, because the original clip itself had to be stretched to fill out our entire comp. I'll cancel here. Warp Stabilizer is almost done, and this is a high-def shot that is busy going through right now, so the time isn't that terrible to analyze a shot. Now it's stabilizing it, and now I ran preview, and you can see how things go absolutely wacky. That background with the tracking dots is what we want to be stable. Instead, it's stabilizing the foreground action and ignoring what's happening in the background. We can fix this. I'll undo. What I want to do is take this footage and temporarily mask out this action. I don't want Warp Stabilizer to be distracted by these two actors. I want it to focus on the tracking dots in the background. Then, after I've stabilized, I can reintroduce the actors into the scene. To keep things straight, I'm going to rename this Stabilization. I'm going to select the footage layer and go Layer, Pre-Compose. Create a composition before or pre to this one that includes just the selected layer. I'm going to name that Masked Footage. I don't have any attributes yet. I haven't scaled it or processed it, so it doesn't matter which option I choose here, but I do want to open up my new comp since I need to work in there first. Click OK. There's my anamorphic shot. I can use toggle pixel aspect ratio correction. If this causes some visible aliasing, I can go to Preferences, Previews, and set Zoom quality to more accurate. This goes ahead and anti-aliases any pixel aspect correction, etc. in your comp display. Now, as I mentioned, I need to mask out these actors. I could go ahead and animate a garbage mask around them. I could go ahead and use the rotor brush feature introduced in After Effects CS5, or I could take advantage of the fact that this is done against a green background and use keying to go ahead and basically key out the foreground rather than the background. I'll select my footage, go to Effect, Keying, Key Light, which is still bundled with After Effects, and that's a good thing. Pick my green screen color, nice start, and this is going to be a really quick lesson in key light. I'm going to go to Status, so I can see an exaggerated version of what is background and what is foreground. I'm going to play with screen gain to make sure the background is completely blacked out. Since this is just a garbage mask I'm making, I'm not worrying that much about my edges. Twirl down screen matte, bring down clip white to make the actor solid. Okay, I'm pleased with that. Grow my screen to be outside of the actors, and feather that out, like this. If I went to my final result, I would see a color-corrected version of my result, which is gray. I have the option to see a green uncorrected version of this shot. I'm going to go to Intermediate Result, and there's my green screen. Okay, I've got a nice garbage mat around the actors, but it's the reverse of what I needed, since I want to see the background, not the foreground. I'll go to Effect, Channel, Invert, and invert just the alpha channel. So now I have just my background with the actors cut out very quickly. Now I have to be careful about leaving this hole in the shot that Warp Stabilizer looks at. Otherwise, it will still try to track this edge and still try to track the actors, even though I've cut them out. I need to fool After Effects into thinking this is just a green wall and just pay attention to these tracking dots. To do that, I'll do Layer, New, Solid, make sure it's the comp size, use my eyedropper, pick the green screen color, click OK, drag that behind my footage, and now I've got a pretty good green wall with just my tracking dots visible and the actors cut out. I see some variation going on here because the green screen was not perfectly even. If I wanted to, I could go ahead and do Command-Shift-Y on Mac or Control-Shift-Y on Windows and play around with the green settings to get a little bit closer. I'll bring the brightness down just a little bit to match it a little bit better. Click OK. And go back to my stabilization project. Now let's apply Warp Stabilizer to this clip. I've created a master version and a pre-comp. Now I'm going to stabilize that pre-comp layer in my master comp. Drag Warp Stabilizer on top, let it do its thing. It's going to take a little while to think about it. And I'll jump ahead just so you don't need to sit through this entire analysis stage. It's done, and now when I press 0 to RAM preview, let's keep an eye on those tracking dots. And you can see now, rather than the herky-jerky camera motion that we had, it's actually just a slowly drifting camera. And we can use Warp Stabilizer just like you saw in the previous movies. I could say, lock off the movement altogether. Preview. And you can see those tracking dots are holding up fairly well, giving me a nice locked off shot. Okay, I've stabilized the footage. Now I need my actors back. So I'm going to go back to the master footage, go to the Europa shot, take my existing effects, select all, and delete them, and now rekey it properly. I could make you sit through another keylight session, but it just so happens I've already keyed this previously. I'll go to my comps finish that came with the After Effects Apprentice lessons, go to Keying Final, select Europa, reveal the effects by pressing E, select Keylight, and I did a little bit of color correction as well. Command or Control C to copy, go back to my master footage, paste these onto my green screen footage, and turn off my green background layer. And now I have my nicely keyed footage without the tracking dots. When I switch back to the comp where Warp Stabilizer was applied, it does not reanalyze the scene. It's already analyzed it before, so from here on out, it's just stabilizing it based on that analysis data. The reason I locked off the stabilization is because I had a still image that I wanted to use as a new background. Let's RAM preview it. And there is my keyed shot, stabilized with Warp Stabilizer, looking pretty darn good over this fake background. I can do some other stuff with shadows and things like that, obviously. So, the summary is Warp Stabilizer tries to stabilize foreground and lets the background do what's needed to go ahead and accomplish that. If you have a shot that has tracking dots in it, go ahead and temporarily mask out the foreground action, stabilize, return the foreground action, and now you still have your stabilized shot. So that's how to use the new Warp Stabilizer, which is the biggie in After Effects CS 5.5. However, for a motion graphics artist like me, some of the really cool stuff is in the 3D section of the program, and that's what we're going to look at in the next several movies.